looking at these rocks, or I should say these stones that are up here on the altar, and I'm reminded in the book of Acts that when Stephen told this story, he was stoned soon afterwards. I'm hoping that today is not a repeat or a reboot of that story. I have been thinking about this sermon for some time, and I must admit it is troubling to me. It's troubling because I'm standing in front of you and I recognize there's something very holy and sacred here. I am reminded that 23 years ago, when I applied to go to seminary, I came into this sanctuary during an exploratory weekend, and Jim Hubert and several of us actually gathered up here, and we all took that notorious picture that they do so often of the times when it's exploratory weekend. And so funny that when we were going through things after Harvey had flooded our garage with about 20 inches of rain, I found that picture. And it just kind of spoke to me, and it reminded me of that person who wanted so desperately to serve God. And it is so interesting that 20 years after that, I walk into this place and I sense the presence of something sacred. I must admit I've sat just about everywhere in this place, even up above, and I have cried in here, as some seminarians have done. I have prayed in here for a map that God might just deliver. I have made friends in this space. I have also said goodbye to friends in this place. I hear God saying, the place that you're standing is holy. And God, I am wanting to still be that servant to simply say, yes, Lord, I am here, speak. A lot has happened in those 20 years. Soon after graduating, I went to Texas, where I served a small church there, Disciples of Christ. And after a couple of years, and after some real thought-out prayer, and understanding my own sacredness, I came out. I lost my job. And I was told that I would never serve again. I listened and tried to hear God tell me, take off your shoes. And I wanted to hear that so desperately. But God instead planted me on concrete streets of Houston in a gay neighborhood that once was the 5th largest gay zip code in the United States. And I discovered homelessness, not for myself, but the people living on the streets. And for the next year, I asked people, if you could have a church, what would it look like? Because I soon discovered that every street corner was a holy place. And that God can speak under bridges, in soup kitchen lines, and to someone who is broken. And lo and behold, came a church where doubts were welcomed and the wounds that we all had encountered were embraced. And God spoke to us, and we took off our shoes for those who had shoes, and we decided to worship God. In the 6 years that I worked with these folks, I started to realize the importance of shoes. Of course, living in Houston, we have sandals, but it still gets cold and we need shoes. I am reminded in this passage that we have forgotten how to listen to the holy. How do we respond when God tells us to remove our shoes nowadays? Do we bother to look up from the iPhone or the iPad long enough to even realize that we're being spoken to? And when we do, are we willing to like what we hear? Or are we too busy trying to figure out whether or not it is okay to be listening? Because God speaks to us differently now. You know, there's with everything going on out there, there is all of these sound bites, and unless you can capture 8 seconds of someone's attention, then you may or may not be able to share the gospel of Christ, or share the good news, or even be able to say, I hear you. Because there are so many voices out there. Would you be willing to respond by taking off your shoes now? Oh, I'm not asking, I'm telling you. Because when Moses went on top of that mountain, and when Joshua was getting ready to look at this desolated city of Jericho, and God said, take off your sandals, there was no question about it. He didn't sit back and say, oh, we better form a committee and talk about this. I better pray about this, or maybe even I need to walk around and think about what it is that I'm being asked to do. No, he took off his shoes and immediately fell to his face, both of them. And you know, there is something about the encounter of being able to strip ourselves and become vulnerable. And that's really what this is about. Because if you really want to look at the sacredness that surrounds us, it's not so much of where we're standing, but it's who we're looking at. Because if I am created in the image of God, and if I am created of the earth, which I do believe, then I am staring at holy ground when I look in the mirror and when I look at you. And if we are not willing to recognize the holy, then where are we? How do we be church to each other? How do we be friends? How do I love my enemy if I don't recognize the creation in front of me? And I'm going to tell you, things are not always easy. I live in Texas. I'm very blessed because I have a loving faith community that myself and my husband, who happens to be African American, and we're reminded of that all the time. And in today's society, we learn where we speak of it and where we don't. I keep waiting for God to just say, take off your sandals, y'all. This is my child. Go and serve. But today, I just really want us to ask ourselves, are we willing? How do you respond to that? If you were walking down Garden Court or even in Nelson Hall or walking into the chapel, and just out of the blue, you kind of felt God speaking to you, would you stop and listen? And would you respond? Or would you be too concerned about whether the voice was right? Moses' life changed. Joshua's life changed. Stephen's life changed. Because when we recognize the holy within one another, then all of a sudden everything changes. We don't need to climb a mountaintop. We don't even need to show up at the gates of a city. We simply have to open our eyes, open our ears, and listen. Nowadays, I spend most of my time at the bedside of hospice patients. And if you want to talk about real holiness and sacredness and the glory of God, then you must be willing to be quiet. because the battery's dead. Take off your shoes. The place where you stand or sit is holy. How are you responding? Are you worried about the hole in your socks? Don't be. God understands. Look at your neighbor. Recognize the holy that is around you. Don't wait for God to say, wake up. Don't wait for God to say, hey, the place where you're standing is holy. We must change our mentality and recognize that every place we are is holy. And until we do, then we're missing it, church. We're missing it, my brothers and sisters. We are missing who we have been called to be. The last thing we should be worried about is the color of our skin, who we love, and how we choose to serve. Because when we get all caught up in the rest of that, then we miss the message. And we miss God speaking to us. I hope you're uncomfortable. Let us pray. God of the holy, we come to you and we give you thanks for this day, for the creation in which we have been a part of. For the times that we have failed to recognize your image amongst us. When we have failed to hear your voice. And when we have been too blatantly bold not to follow. May you speak to us now. May you draw us near. And may you speak in a way that we only hear you. God, I thank you for those who have gathered here this day, for those who have journeyed, for the safe arrival, for those still traveling, for those who are in the midst of classes, for professors who continue to teach, and for administration that continues to lead. Today, Lord, I give thanks for being able to return to this place that I've known as home, but most of all, as a place that is sacred and holy.